Hey everyone, welcome back, or welcome for the first time. However you got here, find your spot, get comfortable, dim the lights if you haven't already, or just let your screen be the only light in the room, glowing softly with my face, I suppose, which I apologize for. But the story isn't about me. It's about them, and by them, I mean a group of people who started with a little village on some not particularly great hills next to a river, and who would, through a combination of staggering ambition, organizational genius, and a truly breathtaking capacity for pettiness and violence, somehow end up deciding the fate of the known world for about 1,000 years. So, the Roman Empire. But we're not doing the asterisk, 5 minutes of conquering version tonight. No fast maps with whoosh sounds and dramatic horns. No gladiator montages. We're going to take the scenic route. The very, very scenic route. Because the real story isn't in the dates of the battles, it's in the people who ordered them, and more importantly, why they ordered them. Often, the why was something profoundly stupid. A bruised ego, a rumor, a deep, unsettling jealousy over someone else's slightly nicer chariot. The fate of millions, balanced on the emotional stability of a man who drank wine sweetened with lead and may have been trying to appoint his horse to high office. It's a miracle it lasted as long as it did. So let's begin at the beginning. Which, for Rome, is always a myth. And not a clean, respectable myth. A weird, messy, frankly problematic one. The year is, let's not put a number on it. It's a long time ago. The place is the Italian peninsula. A region called Latium. Picture it. Green, humid, volcanic. Not the postcard Tuscany you're imagining. This is mud, mosquitoes, and 7 hills that were less majestic peaks and more slightly drier bumps rising out of a malarial swamp next to the Tiber River. This is where Rome decided to be. Not on the lovely coast. Not in the fertile plains. Here, in the soggy middle, it's like choosing to build your forever home in a parking lot puddle because you like the reflection of the sky. An inauspicious start. The legend says it was founded by twins, Romulus and Remus. Their backstory is the first of many Roman family dramas. Their mother was a Vestal virgin, sworn to celibacy, which is always a promising start for a founding myth. Their father was the god Mars. Of course he was. Because if you're going to break your sacred vows, you might as well shoot for the top of the divine hierarchy. This, unsurprisingly, did not go over well. The boys were set adrift on the Tiber to die. They washed ashore, were suckled by a she-wolf, a detail the Romans were inexplicably proud of, and raised by a shepherd. Fast forward. Grown men now. They decide to found a city. On those 7 swamp-adjacent hills. They use augury, reading the flight of birds, to decide who gets to name it. Romulus sees more birds. Remus, being a little brother, responds as little brothers do, with petty Shin. He jumps over the half-built wall Romulus is making, mocking its height. Romulus, in what becomes a core tenet of early Roman conflict resolution, kills him. So perish whoever else shall leap over my walls, he supposedly says. Charming. The city is named Rome, not Rheims, and its first act of state was fratricide. A pattern is established. For centuries, Rome is just a town. A scrappy, aggressive, deeply insecure town surrounded by more powerful neighbors. The sophisticated Etruscans to the north, the various Italian tribes in the hills, the Greek colonies dotting the southern coasts with their fancy philosophy and nice pottery. Rome absorbed them all, eventually. Not just through war, though there was plenty of that, but through a uniquely Roman trick, citizenship. You could be beaten by them, and then be invited to become one of them. A brilliant, if cynical, strategy for empire building. Why waste resources garrisoning a place when you can just make the people want to be you? It was a multi-level marketing scheme with better infrastructure. And the infrastructure, to be fair, was where they started to shine. That swamp wasn't going to drain itself. They built the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer. Originally an open ditch, later covered. It channeled the swamp water and waste into the Tiber. It still exists, by the way. Still functioning. A testament to Roman engineering and their foundational belief that getting rid of your crap efficiently is the first step to civilization. They paved roads, straight, durable roads that famously all led to Rome. They built aqueducts, those gorgeous, graceful stone bridges carrying water across valleys, because a city needs a reliable supply of water for its public baths, its fountains, and its increasingly complex plumbing for the villas of the rich. And they invented concrete, a waterproof, incredibly durable concrete that allowed them to build harbors, monumental domes, and structures that would laugh at the centuries. They were brilliant, practical builders. The administrative email signature of the Roman engineer probably read, "Sent from my stone tablet. We fix water, we fix roads, we fix problems." But while the engineers were laying pipes and setting stones, the politicians were laying the groundwork for a different kind of system. The Republic, a government asterisk, of the people, by the people, for the people. If by the people you meant a handful of wealthy, land-owning families who formed the Senate. It was an oligarchy in a toga. They hated the word king more than anything. They had expelled their last king, a tyrant named Tarquin the Proud, and the trauma of monarchy left a permanent scar. The Republic's motto was basically, never again. So they created a convoluted system of checks and balances designed to prevent any one man from getting too powerful. 2 consuls, elected annually, who could veto each other. Tribunes to represent the common folk. It was messy, argumentative, and slow. And for a while, it worked astonishingly well. It provided the stable, if perpetually bickering, platform from which Rome could wage its endless wars. Because that's what they did. They fought, constantly. The Punic Wars against Carthage, a wealthy North African trading empire, were essentially 100-year-long, existential grudge match over who got to control the Mediterranean. The Roman general Scipio finally burned Carthage to the ground in 146 BC, salting the earth so nothing would grow. They were thorough in their hatred. And when they won, the wealth flooded in. Slaves, gold, grain, art. It corrupted everything. The Republic, built for a small city-state of virtuous farmer soldiers, couldn't handle being the administrative center of a sprawling empire. The new mega-rich senators bought up all the land, creating vast slave-run plantations that pushed the small farmers, the backbone of the old Roman army, into bankruptcy and into the city of Rome itself, where they became a hungry, restless mob. The generals, now commanding armies loyal to them personally rather than to the abstract idea of the Senate, started realizing they had the real power. The stage was set for strongmen. Enter, stage left, a parade of increasingly unstable, brilliant, and tragic figures. The Gracchi brothers, tribunes who tried to pass land reforms to help the poor and were clubbed to death by senators in the streets. Marius, the general who reformed the army and made it a career for the poor, creating soldiers loyal to their commander, not the state. Sulla, his rival, who marched on Rome itself, the first time a Roman general did that to his own city, and posted lists of his enemies to be killed, a practice chillingly called proscription. It was a slow-motion car crash. The institutions were crumbling. The norms were breaking. All it needed was the right, or rather, the wrong, person to give the final push. And that brings us to the end of the Republic, and the beginning of our real story, the Empire. The era of the emperors. The period of unparalleled grandeur and equally unparalleled personal weirdness. Because when you take all the power of a crumbling republic and you hand it to one man, a man who has been told from birth he is descended from gods, who answers to no one, whose every whim is law, you don't get a philosopher king. You get a human being, with all the flaws, insecurities, and family baggage that entails, but now with absolute power and a severe case of lead poisoning from the pipes. You get Caligula, you get Nero, you get Elagabalus. But before we get to the really good stuff, we have to meet the man who made it all possible. The man who ended the republic so quietly, so cleverly, that half the senators probably didn't even realize it was dead until they were applauding his funeral. A nephew of Julius Caesar. A sickly, unassuming young man with a name that would become a title, a month, and the blueprint for imperial power for centuries to come. His name was Gaius Octavius Thurinus. But you probably know him as Augustus, the first emperor. But his story, well, it starts with a murder. A very famous murder on the Ides of March. And a will. And a teenage boy who was, at the time, studying military tactics and literature in Apollonia, across the Adriatic Sea, completely unaware that his great-uncle had just been stabbed 23 times by a group of men who called themselves liberators, and that his own life was about to become infinitely more complicated. Let's float over to that moment. The message arrives. The world tilts. And a boy who would become a god has to make his first, terrifying decision. To run, or to walk into the heart of the snake's nest and claim a legacy written in blood. He decided to walk, of course. Because why not double down? But that is for part 2. For now, just rest with the image. A city born of fratricide. A republic built on rejection of kings, slowly consuming itself with its own success. The engineers building arches that would stand forever, while the senators in the forum below argued themselves into oblivion. The stage is set, the lights are dim, the main players are waiting in the wings. So get comfortable, we're just getting started. The rise of Augustus, and the delicate, bloody art of becoming an emperor without ever calling yourself one, is next. But for now, just breathe. The Roman Empire isn't going anywhere. It's got, about 500 more years of glorious decline ahead of it. We have all the time in the world. Sweet dreams. Or, just rest your eyes. I'll be here when you wake up. Or drift off, whichever comes first.